desert wind howled like a wounded animal, kicking up swirls of dust that stung Sergeant Jake Carter's eyes. His grip tightened on his rifle as he scanned the rocky Afghan hills. Too quiet. His squad moved like shadows behind him, their breath steady, their trust absolute. They'd followed him through hell before. They'd do it again. Then, crack. A single gunshot split the silence. Chaos erupted. Bullets rained from nowhere. Men screamed. Blood painted the sand. Jake's world narrowed to the weight of his dying friend in his arms. The useless press of his fingers against the wound. The choked whisper, "Tell my wife." Then, blackness. Present day. Texas. Jake jerked awake, sweat-soaked and gasping. His hands clawed at his chest, searching for a rifle that wasn't there. The nightmare clung to him like a second skin. His tiny house was a mess. Whiskey bottles littered the floor, their contents the only thing that dulled the memories. The VA called it PTSD. Jake called it survivor's guilt. He stumbled to the bathroom, avoiding the mirror. He knew what he'd see. Hollow eyes, a beard grown wild, the tremor in his hands he couldn't stop. The man who'd once led soldiers was now a ghost haunting his own life. His phone buzzed. Another missed call from his sister. "Jake, you can't keep doing this," her voicemail pleaded. He deleted it. That night, he sat on the edge of his bed, his service pistol cold in his palm. One pull. That's all it would take. No more nightmares. No more failing the people he loved. His finger hovered over the trigger. Bang, bang, bang. Jake flinched so hard he nearly dropped the gun. Not a shot. Someone pounding on his front door like they wanted to break it down. "Carter, open up!" A voice he hadn't heard in years. Captain Riggs, his old CO. Jake shoved the gun into a drawer and yanked open the door. Riggs stood there, older but just as hard-eyed, his uniform swapped for civilian clothes. Beside him, a massive German shepherd stood rigid, its golden eyes locked on Jake with unnerving intensity. The dog's fur was scarred, one ear slightly torn, and its muzzle bore the faint white lines of old wounds. "This is Rex," Riggs said, nodding at the dog. "Best damn K9 we had in the Corps. Sniffed out more IEDs than any of our tech." Jake eyed the animal warily. Rex's chest rumbled with a low, constant growl, his muscles coiled like springs. "And you brought him here, why?" Riggs's jaw tightened. "His handler died 6 months ago. Since then, he's been unmanageable. Attacks anyone who gets near him. They were going to put him down." Jake scoffed. "So you thought, hey, let's give the rabid dog to the suicidal guy?" Riggs didn't smile. "I thought," he said slowly, "that maybe the only creature on Earth who understands what you're feeling is him." Jake opened his mouth to argue, but then Rex suddenly lunged, snapping the leash from Riggs's grip. Jake braced for teeth, but the dog stopped inches away, panting, those fierce eyes boring into Jake's. Not attacking, studying. A heartbeat passed. 2. Then impossibly, Rex's ears twitched. He huffed, almost like a sigh, and sat. Jake's breath caught. In that moment he saw it. The same fury, the same brokenness, the same war raging behind those eyes. Riggs exhaled. "Well, that's the first time he's listened to anyone in months." Jake didn't answer. He was too busy staring at the dog and seeing for the first time in years a reflection of himself. Jake's house became a war zone the moment Rex stepped inside. The dog moved like a hurricane, snarling, lunging, destroying everything in his path. A lamp shattered. A chair leg splintered under his teeth. Jake shouted, grabbing for the leash, but Rex twisted away with a vicious snap. "Easy!" Jake barked, using his command voice. Rex froze, ears pinned back. For a second, Jake thought he'd won. Then the dog lunged again, this time straight for Jake's arm. Snap! Teeth grazed skin. Jake recoiled, staring at the red marks blooming on his wrist. Rex painted, wild-eyed, as if surprised by his own violence. "Yeah," Jake muttered, pressing a towel to the wound. "We're going to be a really great team." That night, Jake lay awake, listening to Rex pace the living room like a caged animal. The dog's claws clicked against the hardwood, back and forth, back and forth, a sound that matched the restless drumming in Jake's skull. He squeezed his eyes shut, but the nightmares came anyway. Gunfire, blood, the weight of a body in his arms. Whump! Something heavy landed on the bed. Jake jerked upright, heart hammering. Rex stood over him, ears flat, teeth bared, but not at Jake, at the dark corners of the room, as if he sensed the ghosts haunting him, as if he was standing guard. Jake exhaled, slow and shaky. "You see him too, huh?" Rex didn't move, just stood there, a solid, breathing barrier between Jake and the night. For the first time in years, Jake didn't feel alone in the war inside his head. The morning sun bled through the tattered curtains as Jake stepped over the wreckage of his living room. Shredded pillows, gnawed table legs, a single defiant paw print stamped in the butter dish. Rex sat in the center of the chaos, panting with what looked suspiciously like pride. Jake sighed, rubbing the fresh scratch on his forearm. "You're a menace," he muttered. The dog's tail thumped once. Day 4 of coexistence. Jake tried everything. Treats? Rex sniffed and walked away. Commands? The dog stared at him like he was speaking another language. Even the vet's advice, establish dominance, ended with Jake flat on his back, Rex standing over him, head tilted as if to say, "You were saying?" That evening, Jake collapsed onto the porch steps, exhaustion weighing his bones. Rex prowled the yard, tearing up clumps of grass with his teeth. "We're a pair, huh?" Jake said, watching him. "Two broken things nobody wants." Rex paused mid-destruction. His ears twitched. Then, impossibly, he trotted over and dropped a mangled tennis ball at Jake's feet. Jake blinked. "That's supposed to be an apology?" Rex huffed, nudging the slobbery mess closer. Against all logic, Jake picked it up. Rex's entire body tensed, eyes locked on the ball. Jake threw it. Rex exploded into motion, a black and tan blur tearing across the yard. He snatched the ball midair, skidded in the dirt, and raced back, dropping it at Jake's feet again. "Well, I'll be damned," Jake breathed. They did it again, and again, until Jake's arm ached and Rex's tongue lolled happily. That night, the nightmare came like always. Gunfire, blood, the choking smell of smoke. Jake woke gasping, fists clenched. A warm weight pressed against his leg. Rex had crawled onto the bed, his big head resting on Jake's thigh. Not guarding this time, just there. Jake's shaking hand found the dog's scruff. The fur was softer than he expected. "Guess we're stuck with each other," he whispered. Rex sighed, a deep, contented sound that vibrated through them both. In the dark, an unspoken pact formed. No one else understands, but we do. The vet's office smelled like antiseptic and nervous animals. Jake shifted uncomfortably in the plastic chair, acutely aware of the states from other pet owners. Rex sat rigid at his feet, a low growl rumbling in his chest every time someone walked too close. "Maybe we should have waited outside," Jake muttered, fingers tightening on the leash. As if on cue, a cheerful golden retriever bounded up, tail wagging. Rex's lips peeled back, revealing gleaming teeth. "Rex, no!" Too late. The dog lunged with a snarl, sending the retriever yelping backward. The waiting room erupted into chaos. Owners scooping up pets, a child crying. Jake hauled Rex back, face burning. The receptionist gave him a withering look. "Sir, if your dog can't behave..." Yeah, we're leaving." Back in the truck, Jake gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. Rex painted in the passenger seat, looking entirely unrepentant. "You embarrassed me," Jake snapped. Rex cocked his head, then deliberately placed a muddy paw on the center console. Jake groaned. "You're impossible." But as he started the engine, something caught his eye. Rex's ear twitching toward the radio, where a talk show host droned on about veteran mental health. The dog's breathing had slowed, his shoulders relaxed, just like Jake did during his rare calm moments. That afternoon, Jake tried an experiment. He dug out his old field radio, the one he'd kept as a morbid souvenir. When he clicked it on, Rex's head shot up. "Recognize this, boy?" The dog patted over, sniffing the static-filled device. Then, impossibly, he sat at perfect attention, ears pricked forward, body still as stone. The perfect military K9. Jake's throat tightened. Guess we both miss it, huh? For the first time, Rex leaned into Jake's touch without hesitation. The nightmares came harder that week. Jake woke at 3:17 a.m., always 3:17, with his sheets soaked in sweat and his throat raw from screaming. Rex was there instantly, pressing his weight against Jake's heaving chest, grounding him. But tonight was different. Tonight, Jake didn't wake up screaming. He woke up running. Bare feet pounded against cold asphalt as Jake burst from the house, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The neighborhood streetlights buzzed overhead, casting long shadows that looked like crouching men. Jake! He whirled to see Mrs. Calloway, his elderly neighbor, standing on her porch in a tattered robe. Her wrinkled face was pinched with concern. "You're bleeding, son." Jake looked down. His right hand was clenched so tight his nails had drawn crescent moons in his palm. Blood dripped onto the pavement. A warm body brushed against his leg. Rex stood beside him, ears flat, eyes scanning the darkness. Not for threats to himself, but for whatever had chased Jake into the night. Mrs. Calloway shuffled forward with a handkerchief. "I was an army nurse in Nam," she said quietly. "The ghosts don't ever leave, but they get quieter." Jake took the cloth with trembling fingers. The old woman's hands were steady as she added, "That dog of yours? He's a better medic than most I served with." Back inside, Jake sat at the kitchen table while Rex methodically licked his wounded palm clean. The dog's tongue was rough but gentle, his movements deliberate. "You're a strange nurse," Jake murmured. Rex paused just long enough to give him a look that clearly said, "And you're a terrible patient," before resuming his work. When the phone rang an hour later, his sister again, Jake actually answered. "Hey, Liz," he said, watching Rex sprawl across his feet. "Yeah, I'm okay." For the first time in years, it wasn't entirely a lie. A black government SUV pulled into Jake's driveway at 0700 hours exactly. Jake knew that timing wasn't accidental. Rex went rigid at the window, a growl building deep in his chest as the driver's door opened. A man in pressed slacks stepped out, early 40s, salt and pepper hair, the kind of posture that screamed lifer. "Captain Velez," Jake muttered, his coffee turning to acid in his stomach. Rex's reaction was instantaneous. The dog launched himself at the front door, claws scrabbling against wood, barking with such fury that froth flew from his jaws. Velez didn't flinch when Jake finally opened the door with Rex snarling at his side. "Sergeant Carter." His eyes flicked to the dog. "I see you've met Diaz's dog." Diaz. The name hit Jake like a punch. Rex's former handler. The man who died in the same ambush that destroyed Jake's squad. Rex went eerily silent at the name, his entire body trembling. Velez continued like he hadn't noticed. "We're reactivating Rex's unit. The dog's federal property, Carter. We need him back." Jake's hand found Rex's scruff without thinking. The dog leaned into the touch. "Like hell," Jake said. The truth came out in jagged pieces. Diaz had been more than Rex's handler. He'd been the dog's foster parent between deployments. They'd shared an apartment, a life. When the IED took Diaz, Rex had dragged the man's body 3 miles through gunfire to base camp. "He hasn't obeyed an order since that day," Velez admitted. "Until you." Outside, the SUV's engine idled. Inside, Rex pressed against Jake's leg like an anchor. Jake made his decision. "Get off my property, Captain." Velez studied them both, the broken soldier and the grieving dog. And for a moment, Jake saw something like understanding in his eyes. "You keep him safe, Carter." The door closed with finality. Rex exhaled sharply, then nudged Jake's hand with his wet nose. "Thank you." The air smelled wrong when Jake stepped outside at dawn. Not the usual crisp Texas morning. This was thick, hazy, carrying the acrid tang of burning brush. Rex sneezed twice, pawing at his nose as they surveyed the horizon. A sickly orange glow pulsed behind distant hills. "Wildfire," Jake muttered. The radio confirmed it minutes later. "Containment at 30%. All residents between Mill Road and Pine Ridge advised to prepare for evacuation." Rex whined, scratching at the emergency kit Jake kept by the door. The dog's ears were pinned back, nostrils flaring as he sniffed the charged air. "Guess we're packing, boy." By noon, ash fell like gray snow. Jake loaded the truck methodically. Water, medical supplies, the precious photo album he hadn't opened in years. Rex paced anxiously, carrying his own dog bowl in his teeth like a contribution. "You're ridiculous," Jake said, but took the bowl anyway. The evacuation alert blared through town at 1500 hours. Neighbors' trucks rumbled to life. Mrs. Calloway handed Jake a jar of homemade salve for the road, her eyes knowing. Then the scanner crackled with a new alert. Child reported missing near evacuation zone 4. Last seen. Jake's blood turned to ice. The coordinates flashed in his mind. Pine Creek Canyon, dense brush, one exit road already engulfed. Rex stood suddenly, his entire body tense as a coiled spring. He stared at Jake with unsettling intensity, then deliberately nosed the passenger door handle. Jake understood. "Are you sure about this?" Rex's answering bark shook the windows. They drove toward the smoke. The smoke hit them first, a suffocating wall of heat and ash that made Jake's eyes water instantly. Rex painted in the passenger seat, his nose working overtime to filter the toxic air. Jake killed the engine a mile from the evacuation zone, the road blocked by fallen branches. Through the haze, he could just make out the flashing lights of fire trucks in the distance. "Lucas!" A woman's scream cut through the roar of flames. A soot-streaked woman clawed at a firefighter's arms. "My son's still in there!" Rex didn't wait for a command. The dog launched himself through the open window, hitting the ground at a full sprint toward the burning tree line. "Rex, heel!" Jake's voice cracked with panic, but it was too late. The dog disappeared into the smoke. Jake ran after him. The fire created its own weather system. Whipping winds, embers stinging like hornets. Jake pulled his shirt over his mouth, squinting through tears as he stumbled over burning debris. Then, a sound that didn't belong. Rex's alert bark, the one Jake had heard only during training drills. Found something. Jake followed the sound, his boots sinking into hot ash. He found Rex standing over a small figure curled under a sandstone overhang, a boy no older than 6. His Superman backpack melted to his shoulders. The dog was nudging the child with his nose, whining urgently. The boy lifted his head, his face streaked with tears and soot. "Daddy doggy!" Jake dropped to his knees, checking for injuries. "Hey partner, let's get you out of here." As he reached for the boy, the canyon echoed with an ominous crack. A burning pine tree groaned, then toppled straight toward them. Time slowed as the burning tree fell. Jake acted on pure instinct, shoving the boy into Rex's chest with a shout, "Move!" The dog reacted faster than any command. Clamping gently onto the child's shirt collar, Rex dragged him backward just as the tree smashed into the overhang. Wood splintered, embers exploded. Agony seared through Jake's leg as a branch pinned him to the ground. Smoke filled his lungs as he fought to stay conscious. Through the haze, he saw Rex standing over the coughing boy, safe, protected. "Go!" Jake choked out. "Get him! To the road!" Rex didn't obey. The dog looked from Jake to the child, then back again, ears flat, body trembling with tension. Every ounce of military training said complete the mission, save the civilian. But those golden eyes locked onto Jake's was something deeper than duty. Then Rex did the unimaginable. He nudged the boy toward a visible trail marker, clear path to safety, before turning and bolting back toward Jake. The world narrowed to heat and pain. Rex dug like a demon, paws bleeding as he scrambled at the smoldering branch. Jake's vision blurred, but he could feel the dog's hot breath on his face, hear the frantic whines between each tug at the wood. "Stubborn bastard!" Jake gasped, pushing weakly at the debris. With one final heave, the branch shifted, just enough. Rex clamped his jaws around Jake's arm and pulled. White-hot pain. Then, freedom. They collapsed together in the ash, Rex immediately pressing his body against Jake's chest to keep him from rolling into embers. Somewhere distant, shouts echoed. The boy must have reached help. Jake's hand found Rex's bloody muzzle. "You broke protocol." Rex licked his palm once. Worth it. White walls, the beep of machines. the too clean smell of antiseptic. Jake blinked awake in the hospital bed, his legs screaming under layers of bandages. A plastic cup of water sat on the tray beside him and draped over the chair, a familiar chewed-up leash. The door creaked open. Rex limped in, his front paws wrapped in gauze, tail wagging at half-mast from pain meds. A nurse trailed behind, eyeing the dog warily. "Your bodyguard hasn't let anyone near you for 12 hours, she said. "Bared teeth at 3 doctors." Jake's throat tightened as Rex nudged his hand. The dog's eyes were clouded with medication, but alert, watching over him, always. By afternoon, the room became a parade. Firefighters shook Jake's hand. The boy's mother sobbed into his shoulder. Even Captain Velez appeared, holding a small velvet box. "The K-9 Corps voted unanimously," he said, opening it to reveal a silver medal etched with valor beyond duty. Rex sniffed it disinterestedly, then rested his head on Jake's good leg. Velez smiled. "Guess he knows where he belongs." That night, Jake stared at the medal on the bedside table, its surface reflecting the dim lights. In its polished silver, he saw something unexpected. His own face, older now, but clearer-eyed than it had been in years. Rex sighed heavily from his nest of blankets on the floor. Jake reached down, fingers brushing the dog's scarred ear. "We're gonna be okay," he whispered, and for the first time he believed it. The morning sun painted the training field gold as Jake adjusted the vest on his newest student, a trembling Labrador named Ace. Across the yard, Rex observed with quiet authority, his silvered muzzle and scarred paws telling stories no human voice could. "Watch," Jake told the young veteran holding Ace's leash. He nodded to Rex. Without a command, Rex moved. He circled the nervous lab once, then pressed his shoulder against the younger dog's side, steadying him, just like he'd done for Jake 1,000 times. The veteran's eyes widened as Ace's trembling eased. "How'd you teach him that?" Jake scratched Rex's favorite spot behind the ears. "Didn't, he just knows." That afternoon, Mrs. Calloway arrived with a box of homemade dog treats and a faded photograph. "Thought you should have this," she said, handing it to Jake. The image showed a much younger Rex, sitting at attention beside a grinning soldier. Diaz. Jake's throat tightened at the sight of the man's familiar smile, the same one he'd last seen frozen in death. Rex sniffed the photo, then gently licked Diaz's face before nudging it toward Jake. "Remember, but keep going." As dusk fell, Jake sat on the porch with Rex's head in his lap, watching fireflies dance over the field where the wildfire had raged a year before. New grass grew thick and green over the scars. Rex sighed contentedly as Jake rubbed his ears. Somewhere in the house, the Valor Medal hung beside Jake's discharge papers, not as endings, but as markers on a longer road. Jake smiled down at his partner. "We did all right, didn't we?" Rex's tail thumped once. "Yeah, we did." 12 years later, the oak tree in Jake's backyard had grown tall, its branches shading 2 simple markers, one for Diaz, one for Rex. Jake knelt stiffly, his bad leg protesting as he arranged fresh wildflowers between the stones. At his side, a young German Shepherd mix watched with intelligent eyes, her ears cocked the same way Rex's used to. "Your granddad was the best of us, Nova," Jake murmured, scratching her chin. The dog licked his wrinkled hand before trotting to the back porch, where a dark-haired boy waited with a tennis ball. The child was Lucas, the boy they'd pulled from the fire all those years ago. Now a lanky teenager, he spent summers helping Jake train service dogs for veterans. "Ready for the drill?" Lucas called, holding up the ball. Nova quivered with anticipation. Jake smiled. "Show me what you've got, kid." Lucas threw the ball into the tall grass. Not a straight shot, but a tricky curve designed to test Nova's focus. The dog shot forward, then suddenly froze, nose twitching. Not at the ball, at something in the brush. Jake's breath caught as Nova carefully retrieved not the toy, but a faded, chewed-up tennis ball. Rex's old favorite, the one he'd brought Jake that first day they'd truly connected. Lucas's eyes widened. "Is that—" Jake took the crumbling ball with trembling hands. Nova nuzzled his wrist just as Rex used to. "Yeah," Jake whispered. "He's still showing us how it's done." That evening, as fireflies blinked over the field, Jake sat on the porch with Nova at his feet and Lucas at his side. The old ball rested between them, a bridge across time. Some bonds never break, some heroes walk on four legs, and some love stories don't end. They become legends. Tag someone who's been your Rex, the one who stood by you when the world walked away. Let's fill the comments with stories of loyalty that saved lives.